Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Daybreak, the leaders of South Korea and Vietnam agreed to resume FTA negotiations next month in the hope of signing a deal within the next year. President Park Geun-hye garners Hanoi's support for her envisioned trust-building process with North Korea. The two Koreas hope to nail down a date for the reopening of their Gaeseong Industrial Complex during their second committee meeting today. Washington's top nuclear envoy visiting Seoul this week is set to discuss North Korea's nuclear issue with officials here. Plus, Russia urges Syria to turn in its stockpile of chemical weapons to prevent a US military strike. The Syrian government has welcomed the idea, but the US doesn't believe the regime will do it or can do it. Daybreak begins now.
You're watching Daybreak on Tuesday, September 10th, and I'm Choi Yuson here in Seoul. We start this morning in Vietnam, where President Park Geun-hye and her Vietnamese counterpart agreed to speed up negotiations for a bilateral free trade agreement to be signed next year. The two leaders also agreed to boost Korea's participation in Vietnam's energy and infrastructure projects. Our presidential correspondent Oh Jin-ju has more on President Park's sales diplomacy drive.
Korea and Vietnam agreed to accelerate FTA talks so that the deal can be signed sometime next year. President Park Geun-hye and Vietnamese President Truong Tan Sang, during their bilateral summit on Monday, decided to hold two additional FTA rounds of negotiations this year, with the first one set to take place in October, which will be the third round of their trade talks. Under the regulatory structure of the FTA, the two leaders also agreed to work towards expanding bilateral trade to $70 billion by the year 2020, which is more than triple the figure reached last year. The energy and resources sector is another important area of cooperation. The two countries decided to continue working together in nuclear power plant development, with Vietnam planning to build 10 nuclear reactors by the year 2030.
우리 두 정상은 한국의 원전 개발 경험과 기술을 공유하는 것이 베트남 원전 산업 육성에 기여한다는 데 인식을 같이 하였습니다.
The Vietnamese president also vowed to support Korean companies so that they could take part in its other energy infrastructure projects, such as construction of thermal power plants and oil storage facilities. With regard to North Korea, the two leaders made it clear that they will not tolerate Pyongyang's possession of nuclear weapons. President Sang showed support for President Park's trust-building process with North Korea and her vision for a multilateral dialogue process in Northeast Asia. President Park will continue on with her sales diplomacy on Tuesday during her visit to Vietnam's largest economic city of Ho Chi Minh. There, she's scheduled to meet with high-ranking city officials, during which she will call for the support of some 1,800 Korean companies operating there. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News, Hanoi.
The leaders of Korea and Vietnam looked ahead to economic cooperation projects of the future. But how has the two countries' economic relationship developed over the past 2 decades? Our Hwang Jie gives us an overview of Seoul and Hanoi's expanding relations.
This year marks the 21st anniversary since Korea and Vietnam established diplomatic ties, and during that period, trade volume between the two nations has risen more than 40 times over. Last year, bilateral trade volume stood at over $21 billion, making Vietnam Korea's 6th largest trading partner. Korea's main exports to Vietnam are mostly production parts for Korean companies that do business in Vietnam, while imports from Vietnam include products like shoes and clothing that Korean companies produce there. A surprising point here is that 36% of Korea's trade surplus came from Vietnam last year, meaning that a large number of Korean companies are heavily investing in the emerging economy. Around 2,700 Korean companies are engaged in more than 3,000 projects in Vietnam. Korea's total investment reached nearly $25 billion last year, and it stands as Vietnam's fourth largest investor nation following Japan, Taiwan, and Singapore. So for local companies, Vietnam is rising as the next frontier for investment, and this is due to the business climate there.
The Vietnamese domestic market is huge, with a population of more than 92 million. The country also has a good geopolitical location. It's near China and other Southeast Asian countries.
And experts say that Vietnam is politically stable compared to other emerging nations like Indonesia and differentiates itself from South American countries like Brazil in terms of labor force.
And their labor is quite diligent, and they are so eager to learn something more like in Korean people.
Following Monday's summit between Korea and Vietnam, free trade talks between the two countries are expected to speed up, which would build a foundation for even more companies to do business in the market. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
And some welcome news on Korea's trade front. The country's exports of IT products rose from a year earlier in August, enjoying its 12th consecutive month of growth. The government attributed the numbers of strong performance in the smartphone sector. Our Hwang Seong-hee has the details.
The growth streak of Korean IT exports last month was fueled by soaring overseas demand for smartphones and semiconductors. Data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Monday showed that exports of information technology goods jumped more than 11% from the same period last year, while imports edged up by around 2%. This led to a trade surplus of over $8 billion. Last month's increase in outbound shipments of Korea's IT products marked the 12th consecutive month of growth. The ministry attributed the rise to strong overseas demand for Korean-made mobile phones, semiconductors, and televisions, which all posted double-digit growth. The strong performance by mobile devices was led by an increase in global smartphone sales, which saw a more than 60% jump in the number of units shipped overseas from the same period last year. With Samsung Electronics, Korea's largest smartphone maker, taking the lead in global smartphone sales, Korea accounted for the largest share in the global smartphone market, with nearly 40% in the second half of this year. Meanwhile, exports of display panels and computers tumbled by 13% and 18% respectively. The ministry expects the country's IT exports to continue the growth streak as overseas demand for Korean-made smartphones is expected to expand further. Hwang Seong-hee, Arirang News.
Amid the widening political divide in the country, the think tanks of the two main rival parties met for the first time at a forum on Monday, aimed at improving their roles as advisors for policymakers, regardless of their political affiliation. Our Kim Hyun-gil has more on the push to build better think tanks in the country.
Cooperation and development were the main topics of the day as the think tanks of the ruling Hanoi Party and the main opposition Democratic Party met on Monday for the first time at a forum at the National Assembly. Analysts and officials from both parties were present to discuss strategies for better advising policymakers and for turning the think tanks into independent, globally recognized institutions.
I hope through today's debate we'll be able to find ways to develop our policy research institutes into competitive think tanks similar to those in developed countries, and guide the institutes to foster effective governmental policies.
Through this debate, we need to find ways to make both parties' policy research institutes independent from their own parties, financially and in terms of hiring.
Experts said each party's policy research institute should become more independent from their own political party by seeking their own funding, as they receive more than 90% of their funding from their respective political parties. The experts also pointed out that in order for the research institutes to become major global think tanks, they need to do more to educate ordinary citizens.
The Policy Research Institute should not only focus on formulating governmental policies, but should also educate the general public on democracy, which will later contribute to an advanced political community.
At the end of the seminar, both parties agreed to continue the discussion at forums held on a regular basis. After more than 2 hours of debate, experts said the policy research institutes must gain independence from their own parties in order to formulate more effective policies and develop themselves into major think tanks. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
The hunt for former President Chun Doo-hwan's concealed assets may soon end, as he plans to announce how he will pay back around $150 million still owed to the state for corruption fines. With the prosecution's probe increasing pressure on the Chun family, the former dictator's eldest son, Chun Jae-guk, is scheduled to announce the details of the plan on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Korea time. The ex-president was ordered by the nation's top court in 1997 to return over $200 million that he illegally accumulated by receiving bribes from conglomerates during his military rule in the 1980s. Over the past 16 years, he has been slow to pay up, claiming that he is broke. The younger Chun is also expected to issue a public apology in the absence of his father, who will not attend due to health reasons.
If you want the latest news from Korea and around the world.
Return to the negotiation.
President Park Geun-hye, given the current circumstances.
On your way to work or at home.
Ministry. The legislature will convene a...
Tune into Daybreak on Arirang TV.
Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said Tuesday. The two Koreas will convene their second joint meeting for the management of the Gaeseong Industrial Complex on this Tuesday, as they look to nail down a date for reopening the factory zone. The meeting comes just days after the North restored a military hotline near the West Sea, one of the preconditions demanded by the South for the resumption of operations. Operations at Gaeseong were cut off 5 months ago amid heightened tensions on the Korean peninsula. The hotline is the only communication channel between the two Koreas that could guarantee the safety of the South Koreans working at the complex. Since last week, an average of 600 to 700 South Korean businessmen have visited their Gaeseong factories each day to prepare for the resumption of operations. Many are hoping the joint business park will reopen before Korea's fall harvest holiday, Chuseok, next week. Washington's top nuclear envoy has reiterated that there will be no six-party talks until North Korea shows a change in attitude. Glenn Davies, who arrived in Seoul for a two-day visit on Monday, will meet with his South Korean counterpart Cho Tae-yong and other senior officials to assess the current situation on the Korean peninsula and to strengthen the country's alliance in dealing with Pyongyang. Davies says North Korea must show a degree of willingness to take steps it has already promised to take, and adds the six-party talks will not be productive when the North is trying to be accepted as a nuclear weapon state. The multilateral dialogue involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Russia, and Japan, has been stalled since late 2008. Syria has welcomed Russia's proposal to put the country's chemical weapons stockpile under international control to avoid U.S. military intervention over the regime's alleged chemical weapons use. Following talks with his Syrian counterpart in Moscow Monday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow will help Damascus hand over its chemical weapons if that would help it avoid being hit by a U.S.-led military strike. Speaking to reporters later Monday, Syrian Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim said he welcomed Russia's proposal but stopped short of saying explicitly if his country would carry it out. Russia's proposal came as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said Washington would call off a military strike if the Assad regime turns over every single bit of its chemical weaponry to the international community within a week. TEPCO, the operator of the stricken Fukushima nuclear plant, has admitted high levels of radiation have been detected in groundwater from an observation well at the site. Japan's Kyodo News Agency quoted TEPCO officials as saying that it's now more likely that water leaking from storage tanks has mixed with groundwater in the area. The contaminated well was found to contain over 3,000 becquerels per liter of beta-ray emitting materials, including strontium. TEPCO plans to use wells to stop more radioactive material seeping into the ocean. Just last week, the Japanese government unveiled a $500 million plan to build an ice wall under the nuclear plant to stem the leaks. It looks like Fukushima residents won't be getting the justice they were seeking, as Japanese prosecutors will not press charges against former Japanese Prime Minister Naoto Kan and plant operator TEPCO over their sloppy response to the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Local residents and activists had filed a criminal complaint alleging them of professional negligence, such as not taking necessary measures before and after the March 2011 tsunami. But prosecutors exempted all of the charges Monday, saying TEPCO could not predict an earthquake and tsunami of that size, and that government officials were not legally at fault for their response. Campaigners can still appeal the decision and request to bring the defendants to court for trial.
And a good Tuesday morning to you all, and a Tuesday all the football fans here in the nation have been waiting for, as the Korean national football team is set to face off against the 8th-ranked Croatia later tonight. Of course, an impressive victory over Haiti last Friday, scoring 4 goals in the match, but that was Haiti and this is Croatia now. And the big names aren't available for Croatia in this match, such as Luka Modric of Real Madrid, but this is a very talented team nonetheless. Croatia has a very balanced team with top offense and defense, but Korea needs to watch out for their quick counterattacks. Meanwhile, while the Korean offense will be focused around Son Heung-min, it's Lee Chung-young who's going to be making all the plays just like he did against Haiti last week. And the match will kick off at 8 p.m. at the Cheonju World Cup Stadium. And moving on to the KBO, where all 9 teams took a break from baseball on Monday night. So let's take this time to look at the standings so far this season. Now, of course, less than 20 games left in the regular season now, and the LG Twins now have a 1-game lead over the Samsung Lions, who are in second place now after the 2 teams split the 2-game series over the weekend. Meanwhile, the Tucson Bears clinging on to their 3rd place spot, just 2.5 games back of the LG Twins, but only a half game ahead of the Nexen Heroes, who are in 4th place after Nexen swept the 2-game series against the Tucson Bears over the weekend. And now over to the bottom half of the league, the SK Wyverns climb all the way up to 5th place now, 1 game ahead of the Lotte Giants, who are in 6th place, with both teams still looking to make the playoffs this season. Kia Tigers, having a terrible second half of the season, are 16 games back of the league leaders, with the NC Dinos about to surpass Kia and the Hanoi Eagles, where they've always been in last place. Well, this past weekend was good news for all the wrestling fans, but not so much for all the baseball fans from around the world, as baseball failed to make it back onto the Olympics. But it seems like everyone's pointing their fingers at the MLB for baseball losing out on the bid. Now, fans believe that it was Bud Selig and the Major League Baseball office that led baseball and softball to fall out of the race for the 2020 Summer Games. Now, the league has long been against the Olympics, citing that it'll affect the season negatively. With the 162 games being played throughout the season, and the MLB taking a month off due to the Olympics will lead to the season ending in December, considering the playoffs end towards the end of October. And staying in baseball with Ryu Hyun-jin out with a minor injury, the LA Dodgers were powerless against Choo-Shin-Soo and the Cincinnati Reds as the Reds swept the three-game series, all very close games. Now Choo-Shin-Soo, meanwhile, continues to get on base this season as he's still fighting for the top on-base percentage spot against his teammate Joey Votto. And now on a side note, Ryu Hyun-jin is still set to make his next start after missing his last start due to a stiffness in his back. Now, of course, moving over to golf, where Park Geun-hye still has a chance to complete a season Grand Slam with the LPGA Avian Championship kicking off later this week. After missing out on the British Open title, the 25-year-old golfer still has a chance to become the first golfer to win 4 majors in a single year. Although the Avian Championship wasn't added to the list of majors until this year, pundits say that a major is a major and that they'll still give her the nod as the first Grand Slam winner if she takes the title over the weekend. And speaking of Grand Slams, here's another Grand Slam title for Serena Williams, who just doesn't seem to lose. This time she took home the U.S. Open title after beating Victoria Azarenka in 3 sets. The top-ranked American taking on number 2 ranked Azarenka. The American comes back after losing the second set to take the match 7-5, 6-7, 6-6-1. The U.S. Open title is her 5th U.S. Open title and her 17th Grand Slam championship. Serena Williams continues to be one of the winningest female tennis players in the history of the sport. And with that said, that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning. I'm Lee Ji-hyun with your latest weather forecast. The weather was generally nice and cool yesterday with pop-up drizzles in Seoul in the afternoon. And it looks like today's weather will be cloudier and cooler than yesterday here in the central region, even after sun emerges out. Whereas the southern region will enjoy mostly to partly sunny skies with temperatures hovering upper 20s. Now that's because we'll be influenced of a weak trough of low pressure from the west, and this is going to trigger showers to Seoul, Gyeonggi, and Gangwon provinces in the afternoon. So central area is not going to be as mild as yesterday. And right now, patches of morning fog and clouds are covered up in the upper parts of the nation. So do not expect sunshine to brighten up your morning commute. Now tomorrow is going to be a rainy one for most regions, and you might wonder if this rain will bring cooler temperature into the nation because things have got always much cooler after the rain. But not this time. We are gonna have a tad cooler afternoon compared to today's, but on Thursday, temperatures will be right back onto what it has been like for the last couple of weeks, so we can continue to enjoy mild afternoon. With that, it's time to take a look at today's readings. Now, daytime highs in Seoul will rise to 25 degrees Celsius. That's 2 degrees lower than yesterday and 77 degrees in Fahrenheit. And afternoon highs in Daegu and Gwangju and Busan will all get up into 27 with a good amount of sunshine. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju will also get up to 27, while other regions, Daejeon and Dokdo, will get up to 25 and 23, and Mount Kumgang will be 10 degrees lower than Jeju at 17. Now, it's gonna be a rainy one for Seoul in the afternoon, but it's gonna be a very spotty one, so you might not need umbrella for your commute. Now, that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for our viewers around the world. That's all I have for you this morning. Don't forget to put on a light jacket because it's going to be a little bit breezy. Have a wonderful day, and I'll be back with more updates at noon.
And those are the stories we have for you at this hour. Thank you for being with us.